Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. While we're waiting for attendees to sign on and roll in, we're just going to do a little bit of housekeeping for everyone. So if you are looking for how to implement risk assessments and security assessments to your CMMC compliance client, you are in the right place because that's what we're going to cover today. If there is anything that you would like to ask for clarification throughout this presentation, please do use the Q&A. My lovely assistant, Sarah, will be monitoring that to make sure that we get everyone's questions answered. It's harder to monitor and answer questions in the chat sometimes, so let's use that Q&A function if you have any questions. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. This is a topic that a lot of people have questions about how to properly address, and I also love to talk about it. Okay, let's just be honest, anything CMMC, I love to talk about. So what are we going to cover today exactly? We're going to talk about how to turn the activities that you are already doing into risk assessments and be able to meet that requirement for CMMC. We're also going to talk about how to make sure that you're collecting the right evidence to pass the CMMC assessment, because this is going to be part of that assessment. And we'll also talk a little bit about how to sufficiently address the security assessment requirement without spending a ton of money, because I get that question a lot. Do we do it ourselves? Do we vend it out? How much is it going to cost, both from clients as well as other MSPs? And in case you don't know, you ended up on this call and you have no idea who I am Leia Shilobod. I am the CMMC IT Princess of Power. I founded Intech Solutions, my MSP, in 2006. I speak all over the country on a lot of different topics, including CMMC. My company is an RPO, and I am a CCP candidate, taking my test so I can finally get my certification because we have a test now. Awesome. I'm also a certified information security manager, author of 2 books, and recent co-producer of the movie Cybercrime, and also the creator of the CMMC IT Documentation Toolkit and a program to help MSPs to implement a CMMC program. Before we get rolling into the content, I wanted to give everyone a warning. The first thing that is very important for you to think about is that if you are managing a CMMC program for your clients, you need to make sure that you have a plan for how you're going to do risk assessments and how you're going to do security assessments, even if you don't perform them yourself. Because if you engage a client in an agreement where you say that you're going to assist in the implementation and the maintenance of a CMMC program, and this is a requirement, so you have to have some sort of clarity on who is going to be doing these things, these activities, and what activities should be done. So let's dive right into risk assessment and security assessment requirements for CMMC. I'm going to share some thoughts with you first, some things to ponder as we continue through this session today. The first is to remember that we're talking about 2 different practice areas in CMMC and 7 different individual practices. We'll review those. All of the practices are considered level 2 practices, so they are not required then for level 1. So another thing I want you to consider is that if you're on this call and you're an MSP, you should also be doing some kind of risk assessment for all of your managed clients already. And at a minimum, you should be offering some kind of security assessment to all of your managed clients, whether that's something that is baked into your offering, or it's something that you are selling as an add-on service. Those 2 things are integral to how we should be serving all of the clients that we manage. And the other thing to think about here as we're walking through all of these things is that many manufacturers already have risk management programs of some kind, because they've oftentimes gone through certain ISO standards and applying those quality or risk management standards in their business. So you want to think about how you can dovetail what this kind of process into existing processes they might have, so that they don't see it as another heavy lift, but just integrated into maybe what they are already doing in their business. And they would then adopt it better. The other important thing is that the requirement for a system security plan is only for contractors who need level 2 and level 3 compliance. And then, so if we could think back on all of these things, then to me, like my personal thought here is that and I'm certain that the MSPs who are on this call will agree with me, that some sort of risk assessment is really important to do with our clients on some kind of basis if they're managed and we're providing them services. But this is only required at level 2 and 3. It's not even required at level 1. And to me, I think that's a really big gaping hole in the CMMC program, that it's not requiring any sort of risk assessment or any kind of security assessment besides a self-attestation that's meeting a couple of practices. And so I'm really interested to see if this changes over time, because we know the program will continue to change and develop over time. And it would probably be, it would be my guidance to implement some of these things that are only level 2 with level 1 companies that you work with, just because it's a freaking best practice. So what kind of objectives are important to meet in risk assessment, security assessment? So we have to assess risk. We need to scan and remediate vulnerabilities. We need to assure the satisfactory implementation of the controls, and we need to maintain an SSC. And you also have to make sure that that you've got the right documentation and evidence, and that you're performing regular activities. So we're going to address a lot of these things as we move through the session today. But first, let's dive into these specific requirements and look at the language in the program that's going to really help us to guide, refresh our memories and kind of guide where we're going in this conversation. So the first RA practice is risk assessment, to periodically assess the risk to the organizational operations, assets, individuals resulting from the operation of the systems associated with processing, storage, or transmission of CUI. So clearly the program at level 2 is to protect CUI, and that's why it's specifically talking about assuring that the assessment of risk is around CUI. So you have to determine the frequency. How often are you going to do risk assessment? And then how are you going to engage in that assessment of risk? And if you see this, it's not just about like a technology, it's also about organizational operations. That means that the client has to be involved on a different kind of level, thinking about this from a strategic perspective as well. And second area here is vulnerability scanning for vulnerabilities in the systems and applications. That's things like patching or other kinds of vulnerabilities, and then assure that they're identified on whatever frequency you intend to scan for those vulnerabilities. And then an entire practice on assuring that you've remediated those vulnerabilities, not just identified them. So when we think about integrating risk assessment into existing MSP processes, we can do this pretty easily, because we already have so many processes where we're engaging clients over time. In fact, reading out reports to clients, checking life cycling, checking maintenance, bringing forward recommendations, sounds an awful lot like, you ready for it? Anybody have the answer? Of course you do. A quarterly business review or a technology business review. But clearly, the rigor that's required for this standard is going to be more detailed, and you require more evidence than probably what we're usually doing for a regular QBR or a TBR. So what kind of strategy can we utilize to have an existing process that we have integrate into this requirement. So my recommendation has been working awesome for us is to meet the risk assessment practice by putting your QBR on steroids. So that's what I want you to think about. Put your QBR on steroids. Have regular quarterly activities. So typically we're meeting with clients on a regular basis right now, mostly quarterly. You're going to do things like discuss risks to the organizational operations, including mission, functions, image, and reputation. That's directly from the practice. Reviewing security assessments, looking at incident reports, doing some incident response testing, creating an awareness plan review, looking at the logs for visitors in the network room, looking at the asset management plan or IT roadmap, doing a ticket review to ensure that the maintenance is actually happening on systems, it's being documented, and then talking to them about some security threats and advisories, as well as reading out security flow reports or important things that have to be remediated, looking at the audit log reports, and doing those vulnerability scans. But wait, there's more. So in addition to things that you would do every single quarter, you're going to do quarterly specific activities, because in this program, there are so many things that can get out of alignment in the technology or in the processes. And if you're not having some kind of mechanism to go back and look at this on a quarterly basis, then it's all going to get out of control. And then your CMMC program that you thought was tight is going to get all messed up over time. So instead of doing all of those things every single quarter, you'll do specific things every quarter, such as, this is non-inclusive, trust me, you do a lot more than this, but here's an example of perhaps that you would do in a specific quarter, not every quarter. You take one quarter out of the year to do this. Things like looking at the audit logging and analysis process review. So reviewing what that process is to see if you need to change it. That's in their practice requirements. Looking at onboarding, transfer, and offboarding procedures, not just IT, also HR, because both are also required. Looking at things like how the CUI media is being controlled and marked inside of the organization. Assuring that you have an accurate removable media list that's approved media, and looking at the change management processes. And then another example is going to that process of the publicly posted information, which is also a requirement to assure that FCI and CUI is not posted publicly. But the thing about that, if we looked at that list, is that that list of all of those things that you have to do really needs to be shared. Some of those things, you know, you're just not going to do or know, and it is never going to be your responsibility. For instance, you know, publicly posted information, you can give guidance on what that means, but it's always going to be your client's responsibility to review their publicly facing websites and determine if they are in compliance with not having FCI or CUI on there. That will always be their responsibility, not yours, as an example. So if this list is shared, this is what I want you to think about approaching this risk assessment process. You're going to guide the risk assessment. You're going to facilitate this process. So define tasks that are going to be completed by you as the MSP, MSSP, or consultant. What tasks will you do every quarter or during certain quarters? And then define tasks that must be completed by the client and make sure it's happening. And then create agendas for every single one of those meetings, because each one will be a little different depending on what you will be doing that quarter. And then send the agenda for that meeting 2 weeks in advance of the meeting so your client can properly prepare. Also, send that agreed upon client task list 2 weeks in advance as a reminder of what they need to do, because the key here, it is a lift in order to do this. That's why it costs money in order to maintain a program. And that's also why there's a great business opportunity for us. But what you want to do is make this as efficient as possible so that our time that we're putting in is as low as it can be for the biggest bang for the client's buck, and then also recognizing which things we really cannot take accountability for, that must be clear with the client that is their responsibility. So use that meeting then to report variances or concerns. So you don't have to like dive deep into every single security report. It's just like, here's the concern. Here is like my digest of a concern, or hey, we got a clean bill of health on the phishing report, whatever it happens to be, as opposed to having to go through every single one of the reports that you've run. And then actually use those agendas to document the meeting notes as evidence. Because when an assessor comes in, they're going to want to see what is the evidence if you are actually performing risk assessments. It can't just be like, oh, take my word for it, we've done this. You know, so this gives that the meeting note is your evidence, and then you can preserve that, be able to show an assessor, and then also to refer back to with your client on what was discussed during the meeting. So now let's dive into security assessments and how we're going to address security assessments. So there's a couple of controls here. The first one is the security control assessment. So you need to determine if the security controls in the organization are effective in their application. So actually going back through all the controls, all the practices, and say, is this an effective implementation, or is there something that we have to change? Is this satisfactory, unsatisfactory? In other words, like met or not met? And if it's met, could we do it a little better? And of course, if you're going to assess, then you have to create some kind of a plan of action. What are you going to do with the deficiencies, or to reduce or eliminate the vulnerabilities in the organization? And then monitor that over time. How do you do this? How are you going to test security controls for satisfactory implementation? I can tell you what we do, and it's also worked very, very well. How often you test security controls is organizationally defined. So we choose yearly, because it can't be less than yearly. I'm sorry. Yes, it can't be less than yearly. It can be more than yearly. And it does make sense for us to just go ahead and make that yearly. We also use examine, interview, test methodology when we go ahead and test for those controls. So examining the configurations or the SOPs, the documentation, interviewing our team, interviewing the client, and then testing it, actually, like, let's see if this is actually happening in real life. And the reason why we use that methodology is because that's what assessors are going to do too. And it gives us practice to see where we might be deficient in an actual assessment. And then we create a checklist for direct assessment of the controls. You could totally do this yourself, or you could vend it out. However, if you vend it out, you definitely want to make sure that you've properly vetted the vendor so they understand what the end result needs to be, so that whatever they're doing is going to satisfactorily meet the security assessment requirements. So what does an example of like a checklist look like? Well, here's an example of one of the things that we put together to help guide us through this process. We have what that action is supposed to be, what specifically we're looking at, the tool or service that we're going to reference when we're trying to test that control, the description, like how we're actually going to test it, and who is assigned to that, and if the client has to have a piece of that as well. All right. The last thing that is required for the security assessment requirement for CMMC is the system security plan. In some ways, that's the bane of many people's existence, because you need to create a plan that details the implementation of all of the 110 controls in the CMMC program. You have to assure that there is a plan, that the system boundary environment the requirements are identified, that all of those things are in the plan, how you are meeting the controls, and how often you are reviewing the plan and updating it. So when I was down in Huntsville for CMMC Day back in September of this past year, I had the opportunity to meet with a DIBTAC assessment survivor. So the DIBTAC assessment is the closest thing we have to potentially maybe what a CMMC assessment process with the CAP will look like. So it was great to get some insight from him about how DIBTAC approached the assessment and what they were looking for, especially in the SSP, because many of us are concerned about having the right things inside of the SSP. And I had the time to sit down and get a lot of great information from him. And this one quote that I really, really liked, and it kind of helps to sum up what an SSP should be like. He said, the SSP should tell the story of how you're compliant. And I really like that because if you just focus on the technical implementation, you can sometimes get lost in the weeds. But if you're really thinking about it like this is telling the story of how we are compliant, then it was easier for me to write better SSPs. And that helped him also to pass his DIBTAC assessment. So if it worked for him, it worked for us. And Jake, of course, now is one of my BFFs, who I go back to and ask strategically, hey, how did you do this or that? Or how did you pass this or provide good evidence? It's always important to make sure that you have a really good network of people who are either assessors, who are doing this work, or who have gone through assessment, that you can bounce ideas off of them. Quick aside, I highly recommend that you not try all of maintaining these programs without some kind of a GRC tool. We did try to use spreadsheets and a Word document for the SSP, and sums that up pretty well. Also, you need to assure that you have a GRC tool where you're storing progress and evidence of compliance, so that they can see how you are changing things and getting better and maturing over time, as well as having a good receptacle to gather all the evidence of your compliance with the program. I've personally demoed and tested tons of tools, and I personally selected FutureFeed to put all of my clients into, and it is a requirement for us for an engagement. You don't have to select FutureFeed, but please do select some sort of GRC tool. It will really help you to maintain the program well for your clients. And I also recommend that you make it a requirement in your engagement that they have some sort of GRC so that you can properly keep track of things. The other thing that I love about FutureFeed, and this is one of the reasons why we not only selected but maintain the tool, is because as you're loading your findings into FutureFeed, it's automatically populating the SSP. Yeah. All right. So what does that look like? It looks something like this, where first you're going through the assessment section where you're actually assessing each one of the controls and its implementation, making notes about the implementation directly into there. And then it shows up over here on the SSP, and then in the deliverable section, push button, have the next draft of your SSP, and it's stamped, and you have a historical record of all the different versions. Man, it gets me right here. So that's the reason why we chose this tool. Well, not the only reason, it's one of the big ones. So what kind of documentation are the assessors looking for? So they're going to look for things like a risk management plan and how you are addressing the risk to the company. They're going to look for your risk assessment plan and processes for how you are assessing risk in the organization. They're going to look for some kind of written assessment of risk. They're going to be looking for some kind of evidence of a vulnerability assessment and remediation plan. What are you doing? Not just like, you know, we do it. It has to be like, what is your approach? And what kind of processes do you have in place to assess and remediate the vulnerabilities? Evidence of the remediation. So if you actually like did the work to remediate, where are you capturing that? Are you capturing that inside of the CRC? Are you capturing that inside of a ticketing tool? It has to be somewhere so that you can show that you're actually making this progress and closing out any POAM items. They're also going to look for some reporting from your tool sets, as well as compiled reporting. In other words, like maybe that in that security assessment that you're doing, you have some kind of a narrative where you are detailing the concerns, or if you think that the control has been satisfactorily implemented. And of course, they're looking for that system security plan, as well as a written assessment of that control implementation, like I just mentioned. So before we go on, it's really important for us to think about really quickly what CMMC is and what it is not, just to get clarity on what it is that you should implement here. So everybody who's here knows that it stands for the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, and it's required for any contractor who is dealing with FCI, Federal Contract Information, or Controlled and Classified Information, CUI. It's a maturity model. So the idea was to make it like very basic for cybersecurity to protect the data, the FCI, to incredibly advanced, where they are a lot more mature processes and requirements for cybersecurity. CMMC is a cyber security compliance program. So that means that that it is not, we're going to talk about what it's not in a minute, but it is a program that you need to implement and you need to maintain. So with nothing about this at this point in time, which means it's a journey, not a destination. And if anyone, whether it's someone here on the call or a client, ever thinks, well, you know, am I done yet? Am I compliant? You know, think back to any time a client ever asked you, am I secure yet? And you just want to be like, what a question. You know, you're never going to be 100% secure. You know, let's shut down all the computers and we'll just, we're going to work on paper in locked rooms. That would be secure. And it's not even possible. So, so you have to think about that when you are developing a program for your clients, but it is continuous. What CMMC is not. It is not something that you can just like swoop in and make a quick buck off of. Why? Because there are real true businesses out there who are just want to do the right thing so they can keep their contracts. And if you're on this call, I hope you're here because you want to learn how to do this right so that you can price your service offering right, make sure that you build a proper service offering to be able to meet this requirement, and that you are truly serving your client so that you can be mission driven like I am to secure the defense industrial base and our nation's secrets. It's also not an infrastructure upgrade project. Too many of us, because we seem to be technical, we look at all these things that are not aligned with the controls, and all we see are IT projects. But CMMC is not an IT project. And if you walk in trying to sell your client it's an IT project, then they're going to get stuck on that at the very beginning and think that, well, once I do this project, we're done. And that's not, you know, that's not. We have security tools that have to be in place, and clearly risk assessments and security assessments that have to happen over time. It's also not GCC high. So just because you have a CMMC requirement does not mean that you necessarily need GCC high. For some things and for some businesses, it can definitely be the easy button for lots of things, but It is not required for all of your clients. CMMC is also nothing in a box. If anyone rolls up and tries to sell you an in-a-box solution for CMMC, run away, because either they are lying or they don't understand the program, because it's clear that there's nothing that you can just say out of the box, here's everything that you need, and boom, here you're compliant. It requires a lot of documentation. It requires a lot of planning. It requires ongoing maintenance of the program. And even if you buy a solution that's supposed to protect the CUI, a hosted third-party solution, for instance, then you still have to have the IT policies, and the computers that are accessing that environment are still considered CRMAs, contractor risk managed assets, and they are in scope. So remember that when you're thinking about scoping as well as selecting solutions. CMMC is also not a tool set. So you can't just say, oh, buy all these security tools and we're going to be compliant. And clearly, after all of this, if I have not demonstrated to you that it's something that you cannot outsource completely, abdicate, or just set and forget, I don't know how else to communicate that to you, because clearly this is something that needs to be maintained over time. So we found that because we have had such success with the implementation and maintenance of the CMMC compliance programs for our clients, that we have been teaching MSPs how to do this too. So one of the key things here that I want everyone to remember is that compliance is coming. Last year, around this time when I was down in Miami, I talked to Fred Vacola, the CEO of Kaseya, and whatever you think of Kaseya or Fred, doesn't really matter. The man knows what's coming, and compliance is coming. So if you learn how to implement and maintain compliance programs with CMMC, the information that we have in the CMMC toolkit and the compliance program for that is easily relatable, and being able to parlay that into different compliance programs if you happen to have clients who don't need CMMC compliance. So you're ready for that, and you're ahead of the game of the other MSPs that don't even understand what compliance is. So the CMMC IT documentation toolkit and coaching program gives you access to the what and the how. So the what is going to be all of the templates, like the IT policies, procedures, plans, that kind of content, as well as the how to implement it, how a control or something in the environment can be compliant or not compliant. And there's a question, are risk management, risk assessment templates available? Yes, they are. We're actually, this month we're doing all of our clients' security assessments. So we tend to try to batch them together, so we get them all done at the same time. We're also putting together a 7-week fast start program, so that those of you that are ready to just like, I'm ready to get my CMMC program running and starting up. So it's going to help you to get oriented to the content that we have in the toolkit, how to implement that content, how to maintain a CMMC compliance program, and how to package, price, sell, and market your CMMC services. You say, so what do I do now? All right, so here's what I want you to do. I want you to continue to join some of our upcoming sessions to learn more. Our next session is about how to stay on the course of the CMMC marathon, because remember, this is going to continue to change. We have NIST 800-171, which it directly impacts the CMMC program. That is in it was under revision, and the draft will be released soon. Whatever changes happen there are going to parlay into CMMC. So what is the strategy to be able to stay the course of the marathon and keep your clients engaged in that and not give you a hard time about it? And then on the 30th, we're going to talk about what you can do to mobilize now so that you can get your company ready to launch into 2023 selling a really solid CMMC compliance program that is profitable for your organization and delivers extreme value for your clients. We're going to offer special pricing, get access to the toolkit, that 7-week fast start program, and also the peer coaching and implementation. So certainly you can build your own systematic compliance program if you'd like to, because all of these sessions are free. And I'm telling you, like, it's a lot of work, but it's not like it's unattainable for you to do this on your own. Or you guys can join the rest of the cool kids in the CMMC Toolkit Peer Coaching and Implementation Program. And together we can be that force that is helping to secure the DIB. So anybody have any questions about risk assessment or security assessment? Well, guys, seems like I've completely wowed you and now you've got a head full of ideas. So hopefully we'll see you next week, our special Turkey Day 11/22 session. And if you have any questions in the meantime, please reach out to me. And oh, there we go. This is the final warning, and that is that the special offer is not live yet. You can go to our website, itdoxtoolkit.com, and find out a little bit of information about the toolkit. But if you try to buy it right now, then you'd only be able to buy it at the retail cost. So that will go live on the 30th. And we'll see you guys next week.